Welcome to Gorges State Park, a place of stunning contrasts and enduring beauty. With its windswept ridges, dramatically steep gorges, and mountain streams flowing over numerous waterfalls and cascades, the park is home to an amazing array of plants and animals, many of them rare and irreplaceable. It's a place like no other on Earth, and it's here for you to explore. It is the North Carolina Division of Parks and Recreation's mission to protect North Carolina's natural diversity, to provide recreation opportunities, and to promote stewardship of North Carolina's natural resources. Because of its unique terrain and abundant water resources, Gorges State Park has a special mission to preserve the unusually diverse species of plants and animals that live here. This rare diversity was part of the driving force behind the push to create the park.
Duke Power bought this property in this area, thousands and thousands of acres, back in the 40s because they could foresee that they might want to build pump storage hydroelectric lakes in the mountains. In the 70s, they built Lake Jocassee. The next thing that happened was Carasan Power Company bought a piece of land at the head of the Horsepasture River, and they proposed to put a dam up where Drift Falls is. It turned out that lots of people knew about the Horsepasture River, and they were really upset by the idea. An organization was formed, the Friends of the Horsepasture, and eventually it occurred to us that you couldn't put a dam on a national wild and scenic river. Our local congressman supported it, and it became a national wild and scenic river within about 2 years, which is incredibly fast. I think it was then that Duke Power began to understand what an important resource they owned in this part of the country, in this Gorges region. And they also realized that if they wanted to continue carrying out their plans for pump storage reservoirs, that they were going to run into a lot of environmental and public opposition. And they came up with the offer to sell off the land through the Nature Conservancy to both South Carolina and to North Carolina. The important thing about this park, it sits within a context of properties surrounding it. We are talking about a pretty much contiguous area of unimpacted forest of maybe 150, 200,000 acres, which is a big thing. It means you're going to have much more biodiversity in a large area system of that sort than you would otherwise. So this was a very important piece of the whole jigsaw puzzle. This is one of the wildest places that you can imagine because of the roughness of the terrain. It makes it a hard place to get around in. It's up and down, and it's rugged. But that's, in my opinion, it's one of its major attractions.
Today, the park rangers at Gorges State Park are working hard to conserve this precious resource, to provide visitors with quality opportunities for recreation, and to educate the citizens of North Carolina about its unique natural character. Maintaining the delicate balance between conserving the resource and using it can be difficult, but with the help of visitors who understand and respect the importance of this natural resource, it can be done. As the rangers work to inform visitors about the park's special place in our natural environment, they focus on 3 major facets of this natural jewel: geology, hydrology, and natural communities. Geology is all about rocks, minerals, and the structure of the earth itself. Geology is the underlying basis for everything we see in the natural world. It literally shapes our world by affecting how water flows, how climates develop, how plants grow. Geology is what makes Gorges State Park so ecologically unique.
The geologic structure here in the park is very interesting because there's a lot of the geologic record for the Blue Ridge preserved right here in the park. The park sits just on the Atlantic side of the Eastern Continental Divide. So the waters that are in the park drain to the Kiowa River, into the Savannah River, into the Atlantic Ocean. The major landform that the park sits on is the Blue Ridge Escarpment, and that's a feature that goes all the way from near where we are in southern North Carolina all the way up to central Virginia. An escarpment is a steep change in the slope of the land, and it's usually very high, and it's over a large extent. And it can form by a number of ways. It can be formed by a fault scarp, where the land actually drops down, or by just erosion over time, where the streams working their way headward cut back into the landscape and make it very, very steep. And that's what we're looking at here at Gorges State Park. That change in elevation is 2,000 feet or more. That abrupt change in the landscape is why we see so many waterfalls and cascades in the park. The streams, the water, likes to take the path of least resistance. So when they can find a weak rock layer or a formation that it's easier to erode, they follow that. And so a lot of the streams that we see here are following the changes in the rock type. The oldest rocks in the park are what we're standing on right now. This is called the Toxaway Gneiss, and it's 1.1 billion years old. This is an igneous rock, so it's very massive. And we call this basement rock. This is the oldest rock on which everything else in the park was deposited on top of. So a really good place to look for the differences in the rock formations are the waterfalls. The falls that we see here are Toxaway Falls, and they're very different from a lot of other falls in the park. When we go downstream and get into the waterfalls that form in the metamorphosed sedimentary rock, they look different because the original rock was more finely layered. The geology really is the foundation for everything we see here in the park. It affects the climate, it affects the shape of the land, it affects the hydrology, it also affects even some of the plant communities.
Hydrology looks at water in all its many forms, on the earth, and in the atmosphere. Hydrology studies how water moves from place to place, how it is changed by the environment, and how it changes the environment. The unique hydrology of Gorges State Park is found in its geologic history and in the climate caused by that history.
We get a tremendous amount of rain. Transylvania County has the distinction of being the wettest place in the eastern United States. We average about 90 inches of rainfall a year. So where does all this rainfall come from? Moisture from the Gulf of Mexico makes its way to the mountains. It hits the wall of the escarpment, and it's like a backstop. It's like a wall that just stops the moisture, and it gets cooler in the upper atmosphere, and that causes the moisture to condense into rain. The rain is actually what has created the gorges for which the park is named. The mountains are steep to begin with, but when you add a lot of water from the rain, you have volume, and you have the steepness, which gives the water speed, and that gives the water a lot of power, and it allows the water to cut deeply into the ground. And so the shape of the gorges are generally roughly a V shape. A lot of the waterfalls are found in very hard to get to gorges. So some people may never be able to see some of the waterfalls, but people can visit a waterfall fairly easily when they come to the park. A lot of the waterfalls in the park are actually cascades. A true waterfall leaves the rock surface and free falls away from the rock. Cascade is when the water flows over rock and never actually loses contact. Most all of the waterways in the park actually originate outside the park. And one of our biggest concerns in water quality is non-point source pollution. And the highest volume of that pollution is what we call sedimentation. It clogs up the gills on fish, it covers eggs of the different animals, covers their home with soil, so there's no place for those animals to live. One of the really special things about Gorges State Park is you really get a sense of being in a wilderness. And that's just because it's such a rich place and there's so much water and it just feeds that diversity.
The unique geology and hydrology of Gorges State Park are the driving forces behind the incredible biodiversity found here. Without this rare combination of geology and hydrology, much of the park's biodiversity would disappear forever.
I think that for most people, the idea of biodiversity or species diversity, lots of different species, is a fairly common idea. What's less familiar is the idea of natural communities. Natural community types are groups of species of animals, plants, fungi, bacteria, and non-living components, if there are rock faces or that kind of thing, that we know occur in fairly predictable groupings in fairly predictable places on the landscape. We know that in the mountains of North Carolina, there are about 4 dozen distinct natural community types. If you come here to Gorges, about 21 of those community types are in this area. Extremely high diversity for a very small part of the landscape. And that's what makes this place so unusual. Conditions change so much from high to low that there's just a continuous change of community types. Natural communities are classified according to their dominant natural feature or species that dominates that area. For instance, we're in a chestnut oak forest right now. And this natural community type is so named because the canopy or the dominant trees that form the tallest part of the forest are dominated by chestnut oak. In terms of what drives this sort of natural community, they tend to be on these fairly high elevations. It's very prone to wind, so you see a lot of trees blown down. There's a giant chestnut oak tree here that's been snapped in half. It's lightning prone, so fire can be a player here. There are fire scars all across this ridgeline here. Other big players here include snow, ice, a lot of turmoil in these ridgetop communities. A lot of things being blown down, a lot of things growing up. As you move downslope, you see other things come into play. For instance, in the gorges, waterfalls, water becomes the driving force. Previously, we were at the top of the escarpment at about 3,200 feet of elevation. We've now come down about 1,600 feet. We're in the bottom of one of these gorges, and this is Lower Bearwalla Falls, a spray cliff community. This is one of the areas that has some of the highest biodiversity in the park. What you have is a system that's bathed constantly in a mist, and in that mist you get a development of species quite unlike anything else in the gorges. Very specialized species that can only grow in very saturated conditions with virtually no soil. It comes down to things like mosses and ferns that can grow and that can spread on flat, wet surfaces and that thrive in these wet conditions. We find that maybe as much as 20% of the rare species in this part of the world grow here in these gorges. And when you talk about maintaining these communities and protecting these areas, the key thing here is protecting that water supply. Small changes in water quality and water quantity can have huge impacts on these community types.
Each of us can begin our relationship with Gorges State Park by understanding the natural forces that have made it such a unique jewel of natural diversity. And as we enjoy its many wonders, as we find ourselves renewed by its beauty and tranquility, we can remember to tread lightly and to care for this jewel.
I think we need places like this. They're becoming more scarce. They don't make them anymore. What we've got is all we're ever going to have, and protecting them, I think, is extremely important.
From a scientific standpoint, this is an incredibly important place because there's so much geology that's relevant to the geologic history of the Southern Blue Ridge and North America preserved here. It's a great laboratory, it's a great place to educate the public and even to educate people who work in science.
There is a huge value to our mountain land. There's a huge value in the richness that's found within the streams and rivers and the bottomlands. To come to places like Gorges State Park and see beautiful streams, beautiful rivers, beautiful waterfalls with high water quality, it really does a lot to nourish our souls.
As you look across an increasingly fragmented landscape, these are the last of the best places. And even if you never come to this waterfall, even if you've never come to these gorges, I think it's important to know that they're protected. And in the conservation business, intact ecosystems are everything. We like to say in parts that we're in the forever business, and part of that forever business is keeping these communities and these watersheds and these landscapes intact and functioning. It's easy to dismantle ecosystems, very difficult to put them back together.